I'm going to read the, for lack of a better word, beginning quotes and the introduction to The Illuminati Papers by Robert Anton Wilson. I contradict myself? Very well, then. I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. Walt Whitman. The opposite of a trivial truth is false. The opposite of a great truth is also true. Niels Bohr. Time is 3 eyes and 8 elbows. Dogen Zenji. I'll pick you up in my car. Oh, you have a car? No, I used to have a car and a chauffeur, but I couldn't afford both, so I got rid of the car. Would a good chauffeur? What good is a chauffeur without a car? I need him to drive me to work. How can he drive you to work without a car? It's okay, I don't have a job. Chico and Groucho in Duck Soup. Introduction. And actually, there's right after the introduction, there's a couple more quick quotes. Future events like these will affect you in the future. Plan 9 from outer space. Does zoology include humans? Marnie, whoever Marnie is. All right, at any rate, let's get down to it. This book dates from a barbaric, almost prehistoric age, over 20 years ago. You will realize how far back in the abyss of time that near feudal epic looks in retrospect when I tell you that I wrote the entire manuscript on a typewriter. Of course, we had electric lights instead of candles, and the, quote, horseless carriage, end of quote, had come into general use, but otherwise the so-called advanced nations remained in a primitive industrial economy, and few could foresee the information age dawning. Those Eolithic days seem hard to recall now. Nobody but the military and a few universities had access to internet or the World Wide Web. If I wanted to do research, I had to leave the, quote, typewriter, end of quote, a device only a little less archaic than the quill pen, and drive to a library where I'd spend a day taking notes with a pen and pad. No human had lived in space yet. The Mir space station did not begin construction until 1986, 8 years after the Illuminati Papers appeared. Most of what I wrote then seemed as fabulous as Oz or Wonderland to the majority of readers. Now, I fear, some readers will find parts of this hackneyed, except in the Manhattan literary establishment, where these ideas are still considered wild and crazy. Those New Yorkers still seem to think the latest radical notions are those of Freud and Marx. Even the first longish chapter in this book, quote, The Abolition of Stupidity, end of quote, dealing with intelligence-raising technologies, seemed like fantasy or satire to most 1970s readers. By comparison, if you hunt around the World Wide Web today, you'll find over 1,000 entries dealing with DHEA, quote, blast, end of quote, Hydergene, and dozens of other brain-boosting substances. Since I can safely assume most of my readers have web access by now, let me suggest that you find out how this field has developed by clicking on smart drugs in the Extropian website at http://www.c2 org and tilde arcuat, A-R-K-U-A-T, and EXTR and dot. But in the 70s, most critics did not know what the hell to make out of these pages and generally classified the whole book as science fiction in disguise. Fortunately, readers as a group do not have the rear-view vision that seems required of posh reviewers, and most of them understood me very well. Every year now, and in fact many times a year, I meet people who tell me their choice of career resulted from reading my science fiction. Most of these people went into space engineering, psychopharmacology, life extension research, or quantum physics. Excuse me. Looking back, I feel a sense of humble astonishment. I seem to have written a 1990s book in the 1970s. Only on the matter of computer networking do I appear to have missed the boat. I knew major changes would come, but I did not know enough about what field to know how rapidly or how totally the cyber revolution would shake, quake, and remake our society. Otherwise, my forecasts of the coming waves of change in space migration, longevity, and automation seem good enough to tempt me to set up shop as a fortune teller. But I did not use any, quote, psychic, end of quote, powers in my future scans. I used simple common sense projections of trends that had become more and more obvious throughout human history. Space migration. Whenever new territory becomes habitable, humans move in, so it did not require shamanic talent to foresee a migration into space. Life extension. Ever since science escaped from the tyranny of the Romish Inquisition, lifespan has steadily increased from less than 40 years in the 18th century to 50 years at the end of the 19th, to 60 years around 1950, to 73 for males and 78 for females in the advanced nations today. With the research on gerontology already underway when I wrote this book, it required no genius to foresee the life extension revolution in which millions of people now use compounds with a high probability of increasing lifespan ever further. And thousands of researchers optimistically look forward to breakthroughs that will give us lives that measure centuries rather than decades. Intelligence increase. My crystal ball, however, seemed to have been cloudy on the subject of intelligence increase. Despite all the people using, quote, smart drugs, end of quote, mentioned above, the majority, at least in the U.S., has grown steadily stupider. I attribute this to a deliberate public of, quote, I attribute this to a deliberate policy of, quote, dumbing down, end of quote, the population, instigated by our ruling elite after the 60s taught them that too many educated people represented a real danger to the status quo. Arlene, my wife, often claims that nobody educated since 1975 seems to know anything, and Kurt Vonnegut has made the same observation. I don't think the situation has gotten quite that bad, really. Only the majority of Generation X seems to think Einstein invented the telescope, or that the Bill of Rights says the government has the right to screw us any way it wants. A saving minority, even among the under 30, seems as bright as the best minds of any generation. A few sections of this book discuss our nation's rapid movement toward totalitarianism. Perhaps too satirically for such a grim subject, some people thought I was joking. These passages now seem, strangely, rather understated. In this connection, let me cite a recent article by Claire Wolfe. Landmine Legislation by Claire Wolfe, 1997, Summer Supplement, Lumpenix Unlimited, Port Townsend, Washington, which rather directly shows that our present urine testing by the piss police only represents a small part of the Kafkaization of this once-free republic. Wolfe lists some of the fascist laws enacted by the 104th Congress. 1. A law establishing a national database of employed people. After this is implemented, only the homeless, the hermits, and the subterraneans will remain free of federal snooping. 2. 100 pages of new laws creating scores of new health care crimes for departures from AMA dogma. The penalties for such heresy include, but are not limited to, seizure of assets from both doctors and patients. 3. Laws allowing confiscation of assets from any escapee who establishes foreign citizenship. If you run like the Jews who got out of Nazi Germany, reconcile yourself to leaving everything valuable behind. 4. The largest gun confiscation act in U.S. history. 5. Increased funding for the already Gestapo-like Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, people responsible for perpetuating the Waco Holocaust. By the way, have you checked to find out if your church is BATF approved? 6. A law enabling the government to declare any group terrorist by fiat, without trial and without appeal. Such groups will then have to turn membership lists over to the feds. 7. Laws allowing secret trials with secret evidence for various classes of defendants. 8. A law requiring states to begin issuing driver's license only with security features, such as fingerprints, social security numbers, etc. By October 1st, 2000. You won't be able to drive without giving the feds all the data they need to snoop into all your private affairs. If that much surveillance makes you nervous, learn to hoof it. And finally, 9. A law establishing a national database containing everything your doctor and you during consultation. Let me try that again. A law establishing a national database containing everything your doctor and you say during consultation. If you don't like the feds knowing all about your recent bout with the clap, or even about your vaginal yeast infection, you might think of running for the border right away. See the third item above about forfeiture laws. If you think this is some kind of joke or satire that Wolfe or I invented, look up the article I'm citing. Wolfe gives the names and numbers of all these laws. For instance, the last one listed, mandatory invasion of privacy of the doctor's office, appears in section 262-264 of H.R. 3101. the innocently titled Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. Wolf calls these statutes landmines, quote, landmines, end of quote, because they are all hidden in bills with similarly innocuous titles. The amazing thing, if you can still feel amused after reading the above, is that all this legislation was passed by a Republican-dominated Congress, which got elected on a platform promising to, quote, get the government off our backs, end of quote. Wilson's fourth law: whatever politicians promise before election, they'll very probably do the opposite after election. Even funnier, the Republicans still claim that so-called, quote, liberal Democrats, end of quote, represent the major threat to our liberties. By the way, has anybody actually seen, heard, touched, or smelled a truly, quote, liberal, end of quote, Democrat in the last 30 years? Or are there any rumors, yarns, or folklore about the survival of that seemingly extinct species emanating from anyone else but the Republicans? Of course, even before the 104th Congress, you already had to give a urine sample whenever the piss police came along, and if any narc liked your country estate, he only had to plant a small amount of cocaine in the pantry to seize the building and the grounds from you without a trial. If the deliberate dumbing down of America hadn't been so successful, the majority of the population would be in open revolt by now. But a nation of sheep submits to the shears and to the abattoir without even bleating in alarm. Indeed, Claire Wolf, whose summary of recent fascist legislation I have paraphrased, comments wanly, "It is very risky to actively resist unbridled power. For that reason, among many others, I would never recommend any particular course of action to anyone, and I hope you'll think twice before taking, quote, advice, end of quote, from anybody about things that could jeopardize your life or well-being." Wolf does mention, without endorsing, some of the methods that various brave souls have employed in the attempt to recapture some of our lost liberties: tax refusal, civil disobedience, non-cooperation with the authorities, boycotts, cessation efforts, monkey-wrenching computer hacking, dirty tricks, public shunning of government agents, alternative communities that provide their own medical care and utilities. Whenever any of these tactics gets enough publicity or causes enough nuisance, the authorities react the same way authorities can be expected to react. Never forget Waco. Never. Tax refusal, whatever brilliant legal arguments some libertarians produce to justify it, usually provokes confiscation of everything you own, and a jail term usually follows. Civil disobedience and non-cooperation can only land you in the can, or it can escalate to Ruby Ridge massacres. Boycotts remain safe if you can figure out the tactics carefully and have a lot of associates. Monkey-wrenching, computer hacking, and dirty tricks remain popular, but also lead to jail if you get caught. Public shunning is both possible and legal. It happens increasingly in places like Idaho, Utah, Montana, and Nevada. Alternative dropout communities are only safe as long as they remain very low profile. Now, maybe you can see why I have so much enthusiasm for civilian space colonization. That will still take quite a while. Meanwhile, you might consider migrating to crypto space. Quote, crypto space, end of quote, is my name for the part of cyberspace presumably invisible to government snooping. As T.C. May writes, strong cryptography exemplified by RSA, a public key algorithm, and PGP, pretty good privacy, provides encryption that essentially cannot be broken with all the computing power in the universe. Digital mixes or anonymous remailers use crypto to create untraceable email. Digital cash, untraceable and anonymous, like real cash, is also coming. Crypto anarchy and virtual communities. T.C. May at netcom.com. Hey, I'm going to make a little aside here and say I do believe he just predicted the rise of Bitcoin. That's what it looks like to me, right offhand. J. Oren Grabe comments, the government doesn't want you using cryptography because they want to know where your money is so they can get some of it. And they don't like you using drugs unless the government is the dealer. 3. Grabe via T.C. May above. In fact, virtual communities with virtual cash already exist in crypto space. According to the Encyclopedia of Social Inventions, Encyclopedia of Social Inventions, Institute of Social Inventions, London, 1990, the first non-interest-bearing, non-taxable virtual money came into existence in Vancouver in 1983. The idea has not received much publicity, but it spread as far south as San Diego by 1990. Unlike Fed notes, virtual money, a form of barter, does not require interest because virtual cash is created by the people who use it for their own convenience. Fed notes, on the other hand, are carefully created precisely to bear interest at as high a rate as the market will bear. Your share of the national debt is money you owe to the Fed for using their notes, which you have to use until you find the doorway to freedom and creep off into crypto space. And virtual cash is tax-free because the IRS can't find it. Evolution proceeds, it seems to me, by challenges which force organisms to get smarter in a fascist state like Bill Clinton's USA. The smartest will find ways out of the cage much more effective than the tactics of Randy Weaver on his mountain, or the Republic of Texas, or similar groups still seeking freedom within geospace. There is no freedom in geospace. Every square inch has been mapped and claimed by some nation or corporation or syndicate. The only remaining frontier is electronic. The internet not only opens the door to freedom just when the feds seem to have The internet not only opens the door to freedom just when the feds seem to have us locked up forever, but it also seems to make de-sovereignization, quote end of quote, as Buckminster Fuller called it, inevitable. According to Fuller's analysis, the great pirates, kings, emperors, mikados, prime ministers who seized control of Terra at the beginning of the Bronze Age are now sponsored entities, puppets of finance capitalism. When Fuller wrote Grunch of Giants, it required $100 million to run a campaign for president. It seems even more now due to inflation. It requires even more now due to inflation. Guess where the politicians of the world get that kind of money? And then you'll have a good idea who really runs the world today. Whether the Republicans or Democrats win an election, the Federal Reserve still makes the important decisions. Whether the Tories or Labour win in England, the Bank of England remains in control. As Fuller wrote, never before in all history have the inequities and the momentum of unthinking money power been so glaringly evident to so vastly large a number of ... all around the world humans ... 5. From Grunch of Giants by R. Buckminster Fuller, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1983, page 89. For more details of how Fuller expects these informed humans to de-sovereignize the planet, cooperatively advantaging all without disadvantaging any, through electronic speed of light synergy with internet, see http://www.teleport.com/tilde/grunch/html period. As I point out in Celine's Laws, in quote, Celine's Laws, end of quote, later in this volume, authoritarian communication is always blocked by snafu. Nobody tells the whole truth about anything to those who have the power to jail and kill. Libertarian communication via internet allows for quicker feedback, which will also be more accurate feedback, and Spaceship Earth will begin to move in a sensible way at last, no longer having 150 plus supreme commanders all steering in different directions. Until that planetary synergy, called the global brain by British philosopher Peter Russell, emerges fully, we still have jury nullification, guaranteed de jure since the Magna Carta, and de facto unalienable When you sit on a jury, no power on earth can force you to find somebody guilty in a case where you believe the law itself is unconstitutional, tyrannous, or dangerous to your own civil liberties. Here are a few citations which state education and the mass media try their damnedest to keep you from ever seeing. Every jury in the land is tampered with and falsely instructed by the judge when it is told that it must accept as the law that which has been given to them, or that they can decide only the facts of the case. Says Lord Denbigh. Homing versus District of Columbia. I guess page 138 from 1920. Here's another quote. If the jury feels the law is unjust, we recognize the undisputed power of the jury to acquit, even if its verdict is contrary to to the law as given by a judge and contrary to the evidence. Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. That would be U.S. versus Moylan in 1969. And another quote. When a jury when a jury acquits a defendant, even though he or she clearly appears to be guilty, the acquitted conveys significant information about community attitudes and provides a guideline for future prosecutorial discretion. ... Because of the high acquittal rates in prohibition cases in the 1920s and early 1930s, prohibition laws could not be enforced. The repeal of these laws is traceable to the refusal of juries to convict those accused of alcohol trafficking. Sheffen and Van Dyke, in a book called Laws and Contemporary Problems, page 43, November 4th, 1980. For more details on how juries can protect our civil liberties, even when the government is hell-bent on destroying them, see http://nowescape.com and FIGA and FIGA_US.html period. The Chinese allegedly have a curse which says, "May you live in interesting times." We undoubtedly live in interesting times, but I don't find it a curse. As Nietzsche would have said, anything that doesn't kill me makes me smarter. The evils of the world, which involve massive starvation, as well as the erosion of individual liberty, I have been discussing, challenge us to use our heads better, and the head revolution is what this book is all about. Turn the page and you'll find even more reasons to feel braced and excited about the problems we confront and our ability to deal with them. Solving problems is one of the highest and most sensual of all brain functions. Robert Anton Wilson, Freedom, California, 23rd of May, 1997.